This is June 30th, video number 25. I want to mention that the problem with not understanding our existence well enough. Now, we're not going to understand every detail probably, but we can understand it better and better. We can get the nature of it down better. The problem with that is not understanding it well enough makes us vulnerable to all sorts of predatory and parasitic philosophies that don't deserve us, that don't deserve our minds. You're going to pay for those, and they're not worth it because they're not true. How do you know they're not true? By checking into them. It's just like the themes of the New Testament, for example. If one of the major themes of the New Testament is Jesus' words will be forever, the world will pass away before the relevance of Jesus' words fails. Basically, it says at the end of Matthew and the end of, I think it's Luke, and there's other, it's all over the place. Gospel of Mark, on and on about his words. Now, when you discard his words and you just want his sacrificial death so that you can get people to get saved, and then they're enrolled in your church, and then they're supposed to give and tithe, well, you've abandoned, it's not relevant. It's not true. If that was so important to the deity that was over the New Testament, and now it's not important, that shows it's man-made. That's just one way of telling that something is false and man-made and doesn't deserve our minds. So Jesus rising from the dead, if that's not true, it's a waste of time. It's a waste of time. But there's all kinds of other things that are similar that you would be, that are parasitic. They don't deserve your mind. They don't deserve your money. We don't need those things. Those things need to go away. It's content like this that I'm starting out in this video with that is why my product is called Endless Cycle Universe Philosophy and Physics, because there's a philosophical implication for all of this. The reason for doing it is because of its philosophical implication on the human mind. Now, the last thing we need in the world is more radical Islamic terrorists. That's caused by religious faith. Now, there's other forms that aren't a problem, but still, the root cause is religious faith. The root cause in Christianity is its apocalypticism for why a lot of the problems have happened with it. It's when let me put it to you this way. As far as Christianity is concerned, it being an apocalyptic religion, like Islam is also an apocalyptic religion, though it came many hundred years after Christianity and sort of mimicked it in some respects, mimicked Judaism too. The reason apocalypticism in a religion is caustic, is a big problem, is because it's supposed to happen at any time, and that's supposed to make you scared, or it's supposed to make you fearful, and so that you respond to it. But the problem with that is it could happen at any time. You're going to have people who think it's true are going to think it's happening right now. And when you start to try to connect all those dots, see, the problem is, okay, Jesus supposedly came, which he did, okay, and he died, which he did, on a cross, which he did. And then he supposedly rose from the dead, and he's the Son of God. Okay, he didn't rise from the dead, though. But he was an apocalypticist. The problem is, how does all of this apply to us today? What are we supposed to be doing? We're supposed to be worrying about the end of the world. The people who are making money off of this, they don't care about that. If they can get people stirred up, ginned up using that, then that's fine. You know, it's like, let's get people ginned up about all of this, and then they'll give offerings, and we'll get a lot more people to come in. And that's harmful. But most of the religious ministers in this, they know it's a detriment to promote its apocalypticism, but it's in there. And if you take it seriously, that's about the here and now. You know, what happened in the past, according to the New Testament, that's already done. What are we supposed to be doing now? And the New Testament emphasizes its apocalypticism like crazy. You know, are you going to do what this God wants you to do? It's crazy. It's crazy. But anyway, that's why this is not just physics, what I'm doing. It's also, it's very much about philosophy as well. And what a good, constructive human philosophy would be like, what we should be thinking. It's about what we should be thinking. Anyway, as far as the physics side of this today, I'm going to make some big steps, I believe. Been thinking about this over the course of the night. Sat outside thinking about it during the night, and spent some time on it, more time since the last video, number 24. And I think what's going on, I'm going to shift gears now back into physics. With copper, I think the explanation, the two possibilities for why copper is such a good conductor, I don't think I nailed it yet. I don't think that electric photons are coming in and making their way in between the particles and the radio shells. I think that's a possibility with some elements, and might have something to do with them being a poor conductor and having so much resistance, like carbon and graphite, for example. But I think the idea that, let's say, 5% of the outer shell, radio shell, it has 5% of its capacity, and so it's orbiting. And the problem with that is momentum is going to help those particles to move in a straight line. Momentum resists movement to either side. So I kind of knew that when I said that. I knew it wasn't a very good possibility when I said that, but I thought, okay, what else is there? Well, here's what looks like it probably is to me now. And that is that outer shell in copper is most likely 25% filled. It might be 33% filled, but let's say in that range. The reason is when you have incoming rate, okay, back up here. In the filled shells where the particles are held by repel, they're held away by repel from the surface of the nucleus, but they're also held with respect to one another and hold their positions by repel. And like I said with visible light, when they can push in by a collision with, say, a photon, but then they recoil back because of the repel. And when they recoil back, another photon, say a visible light photon, hits it while it's recoiling back, and then it comes off at light speed, and that's bounced light. I think that's a great explanation for how light is bounced and how it's off of objects, and it has to do with the colors of objects. The radio shells have to do with that. So I'm not going to be changing on that anytime soon. I think I've got that. When I first realized, this atom model is based on viewing atoms lensing in cotton fabric in direct sunlight. And the atoms are not part of the cotton. They're the large atoms that attach to the cotton fibers, and they're visible when you looking through the cotton fabric at direct sunlight. And the gray area, this whole model is based on that. What does that mean? Seeing that gray area that's surrounding the nucleus, and then those dark black circles, some have 3, some have 4 out from that gray area. So anyway, I believe what's going on is, and with copper, is that you have this unfilled shell, outer shell of radio particles. Now, there's been a reason to believe, eventually with my project of configuring nuclei, according to how I think the next one would configure according to mass, and to keep its proton or neutrons separated via the protons. Well, as I make my way ahead with that, when you get to iron, there was a reason I mentioned here a few months ago why I thought iron might be the first element that actually has some electrons proper over it, instead of just radio shells. And so copper is a heavier nucleus than iron. So there might be some radio or actually electron shells, a neutrino electron shell out there. There might even be a beta 27 electron shell out there in copper. But nonetheless, okay, if there is, now it would you would have filled shells, a filled outer shell underneath the those 2 electron shells. But I don't know yet, that I haven't done it, haven't got to that point yet, so I know or feel confident at all that that iron is the first element that has an electron shell proper. I still don't know that yet. It looked like that's where it's going to, but I haven't done it yet. So one of the possibilities that I thought of this last night is that in copper, maybe they still don't quite yet have those electron shells outside of the radio shells. So if not, then the explanation may be, the correct explanation might be, and this is better than anything I offered in video number 24, is that if it's 25 or 30% or so filled, when radiation particles come in and collide into those, they're not being held by their neighbors in the same shell, in a filled shell. So they're like pinballs, sort of. When they get struck, they'll move, but they're still held by the nucleus. They can't orbit though, because there's too many of them. So they're basically sliding around at the distance that shell occupies from the nucleus. And when they're hit, they're still attracted, or still held. Now some of them could be lost, but then they would be quickly regained if there was a deficit. But when they're hit, they move a pretty long distance because the shell is not filled. And so this is what I'm favoring right now for that, is that why that would encourage electric current when there's a profusion like that produced at a rotor in a electricity power plant, where the dynamo is turning, the rotor and the dynamo is turning. The reason that would make the copper wire, the copper atoms, take on that perfusion being offered, which is a change in the environment, in the more natural occurring proportions of different particles in the environment. Okay, when there's no perfusion being offered, by that turning of the rotor. Then when those are hit by radiation and that outer shell is 25 or 35% filled, they move around and they might even come off of their shell distance. And so you have that going on, but it's not violent enough so that there's an opportunity for the electric photons, which are more fleet because they have less mass, to come in and supplant them, some of them. Now, when you have the perfusion there, now you have these being offered next to it. So whenever one gets hit and it comes out from its shell a little ways, instead of it just going back or another one replacing it, now you have the opportunity for some electric photons to supplant them, and so they come in, and there can be a buildup of those in that shell that can be shared down the line, because that's a better explanation than either two options I offered in video 24. Now, I want to include with this, I want to make some clarifications here. Now, I'm trying to get it right, so everything has a reason to make sense. And so, the basis is what you view of large atoms in cotton fabric, lensing, and sunlight. Okay, what's going on with that? But that's the data, basically, that I'm using, the visual data, to work out what a person actually sees when they're viewing those atoms, lensing, and cotton fabric in direct sunlight. Anyway, I have a combustion explanation I really like. I had that combustion explanation from the very first moment, right after the book, and I started my website. I came up with that combustion explanation. I had some other things that I was trying that didn't work out, but I really still like the combustion explanation, it's basically remained the same till now, and it's in my new book. I want to retain that. I think that's how combustion works. I don't think the redox explanation is. I don't buy any of the redox explanations. I'm not buying any of the ion explanations. I'm not buying cations and anions. Those explanations are something that the standard model needs. You need something to explain this stuff. So that's what they came up with, and I'm not buying into that. My combustion explanation. Okay, now let's talk a moment about the gray spherical radio shells. If they're gray, that means that visible light photons can go through them. A lot of them, but not. It's gray because a lot of visible light photons can go through, but not as many as in the area next to it where there are no shells. Let's say between the outer shell, if it was filled, and then your first electron shell. Now there's basically open space there where photons can pass through, and they pass through, and it's bright. It's bright light. It's illuminated. It's not gray. But in the gray, the reason it's gray and not black is because quite a few photons, visible light photons, and other stuff can pass through those shells. Okay, it collides into those, makes bounce visible light, probably some other stuff, but it also there's also a lot of that stuff that can pass through there, and that's why it's gray. Now, along with my combustion explanation, there's two things that go along with that. The electric layer that I thought might explain, that seemed logical, there would be an electric layer inside the innermost radio shell. I'm probably going to just let that go, because it could be there or it may not be there. It's not important. The reason I'm going to let it go, and this is related to the combustion explanation, it may not sound like it right at first, but what you had to have with my magnet explanation and the combustion explanation, you have to have the ability of photons and even infrared particles, some, to pass through the radio shell area and reach the nucleus. If radiation scares off some photons that are mid-positives off the surfaces of nuclei, they have to be able to get to the nucleus. And to do that, and then the deficit has to be created so that more like those from the environment come in and try to land, but they can't because the other ones like them keep hitting them from behind, and they keep moving forward and keep circulating. So I'm going to keep that. The combustion explanation is that in the environment, when a 15 mass unit doesn't have enough yellow-green photons on it, let's say, too many greens, which are ambivalent, that those don't occupy radio or electron shells. The ones that are more mildly charged on the surface are a radio shell, make a radio shell. The ones that are higher making the neutrino electron. Now, since they don't orbit anything and get organized or anything, they collide into everything. And this is why you get readings about temperature from infrared light. Anyway, when they collide into everything, they're going to come pelting in through those radio shells to a nucleus. And when they do, when they hit a yellow or yellow-green photon that's attached to the surface, helping neutralize a nucleus, the surface of some nucleons, let's say. When they hit right on one, they have enough mass to supplant it. The photon is knocked off. The infrared particle that has a lot of greens and yellow greens, not so many yellow greens on the surface, maybe a lot of blue greens. It may not have any yellow greens on its surface. If it does, it would be more like a radio particle. But anyway, it has greens and blue greens. And when it hits that, it's got enough mass, it knocks it off there. But it sticks in its place. And when it sticks in its place, then you're going to have a buildup of these doing that. And when you do, it's like in phosphorus now, when you strike a match. And here's the other thing I was going to say about this, is when I was first working on that, I had open nuclei because I had planar electron shells. The nuclei surface could be reached. Well, with your spongy radio shells encompassing a nucleus, enveloping it, those are spongy enough so that when you strike a match, say with phosphorus or something that is used to make matches, you're actually able, because there's these radio shells, they're spongy. But now, when you have a visible light photon striking one, the mass is so little that it may push it in, but it recoils back. So you're not really, it's not that disturbing to it. It's able to hold up with its repel. If you take and push a match against the striker for the match, now you've put enough pressure to force your way through those spongy radio shells and reach the surface of the nucleus, and you rake off a whole bunch of those infrared particles. When you do, it's just like when there's a magnet response. Lots of electric photons, the infrareds can't respond and come in by being attracted. They're not attracted. They only came in kinetically and then managed to take over those spots. Once you rake them off, it's going to be the electric photons that come back and to fill those spots again. And if they don't come down in a polar manner so that they're on the sides and passing by a nucleus, and they come more in directly from the sides, now they can land, maybe they bounce and they end up hitting a radio shell and then bounce back, and they slow down and then they attach. So I still think that's a great combustion explanation. I'm going to stick with that. I'm going to stick with, now I'm going to abandon at this point the electric layer. There's no reason to have it if electric current is shared between atoms and copper wire, etc., by an explanation that has to do with the outer radio shell being, say, 25 or 35% filled. So I'm going to abandon the electric layer. Well, I have to abandon it. You can't, if you had those yellow greens and yellows residing next to the nucleus over the protons, any scouring off that you would get that would cause magnetism, you would have those ready to just come a short distance and attach. So that doesn't, see, this whole system I'm trying to atom model that I'm trying to assemble. Okay, everything has to harmonize. And so when you see something that doesn't harmonize, it doesn't make sense, it's not a good naturalistic explanation, then you have to just let some things go. I'm going to keep the combustion explanation. I'm going to keep the magnet explanation. I'm going to get rid of the electric layer right over the nucleus underneath the first radio shell. And now, right now, I'm going to say that it's in copper, it's probably a partially filled outer radio shell that makes it such a good electric conductor.